Have you ever thought about how much the brain is responsible for? Every move you make, from blinking your eye to performing a triple axel, is conducted by the brain. Simply put, all motor actions are due to the brain's ability to send signals to the right muscles, which happens in the motor cortex. The motor cortex has three components: the primary motor cortex, the premotor area, and the supplementary motor area. This video will focus on the role of the premotor and supplementary motor areas on voluntary control of movement. The premotor areas are located in the frontal lobe, rostral to M1, and can be subdivided into the dorsal premotor area and the ventral premotor area. The supplementary motor area is situated medial to the premotor area.
The PMD is involved in planning and selecting goal-directed voluntary movements. It's important in selecting one action amongst many alternatives. PMD uses somatosensory feedback during movement to help guide and control actions. There are two divisions of the PMD, rostral and caudal PMD. Due to time constraints, we will not be going into the specifics of these two divisions today. The PMV is involved in hand shaping for grasping movement. The PMV more broadly encodes actions to produce dexterous control of the hands. PMV neurons are sensitive to all grip types, but are most sensitive to precision grip using the index finger and the thumb. Canonical neurons in the PMV are sensitive to object shapes such as bars, rods, or cylinders, and aid in the shaping of the hand for grasping actions. Mirror neurons in the PMV represent the overall goal of an action, regardless of whether you perform the movement or observe someone else doing it, to help us understand the intentions of others based on their movements. The SMA is involved in sequences of self-generated, learned motor actions. It shows increased activity when performing familiar learned actions and little activity while performing an untrained sequence of movements. The SMA also aids postural stabilization during stepping and climbing movements and in bimanual coordination such as typing.
The premotor area and the supplementary motor area receive inputs from the prefrontal cortex for planning and selecting voluntary motor actions, posterior parietal cortex for proprioceptive and visual feedback to guide motor actions, and the primary somatosensory cortex to process sensory feedback during ongoing movements. Once an action is selected, efferent outputs are sent to the primary motor cortex, the posterior parietal cortex, and the cortical spinal tract. Today we will focus on how the cortical spinal tract carries movement-related info from the motor cortex to the spinal cord. Premotor area neurons travel down the internal capsule to the midbrain. The signal then travels from the midbrain to the pons and then medulla. In the medulla, neurons enter the medullary pyramids where 90% decussate to cross over from the ipsilateral to the contralateral side of the brainstem in a bundle called the pyramidal decussation. The decussating fibers enter the spinal cord on the opposite side of the body in a pathway known as the lateral cortical spinal tract. Most of these neurons synapse on interneurons in the intermediate zones of the spinal cord. The remaining 10% of the fibers continue ipsilaterally in the spinal cord through the ventromedial or anterior cortical spinal tract. These neurons only cross over when they reach the level of the spinal cord in which they exit from. Neurons in the anterior pathway also synapse on interneurons in the intermediate zone. The lateral cortical spinal tract controls the movement of more distal muscles, like those of the hands, while the ventromedial cortical spinal tract controls the movement of more central axial muscles, like those of the trunk.
Now let's take a look at what happens to the motor control of an individual after a stroke. Damage to the premotor and supplementary motor areas after a stroke can cause interruptions to motor signals traveling from the cortical spinal tract to motor neurons. According to Zhu, Hayth, and Krakauer, decreased input to motor neurons following a stroke can cause hand impairments such as weakness and loss of control, resulting in decreased dexterity or grip strength in the affected hand. A study conducted by Cantac showed that perturbing PMD activity increased reaction time and slowed responses to choice reaction time tasks. This supports the critical role PMD plays in motor planning and selection and explains why a lesion in the PMD makes planning and learning goal-oriented actions difficult. Inactivation of the PMV in monkeys greatly impaired hand pre-shaping prior to grasping, leading to inaccurate hand position over the target. A lesion to PMV in humans also altered the positioning of fingers on the object during grasping. That's all the time we paid for, folks. See you next time.